Welcome to Behind the Curtain, Nashville's movers, shakers,
and tastemakers.
Brought to you by Chord Real Estate, your key to the heart of Nashville. I'm Steve Luther alongside my co-host Van Hoy.
Here we peel back the layers of Nashville's vibrant scene, sitting down with the innovators, creators, and leaders who shape our city. From music to business and everything in between, we dive into the journeys that have brought them to where they are today.
We're here to uncover the stories behind the success, the passion driving their pursuits, and why they've chosen Nashville as their stage. It's about the people who dream big, push boundaries, and make this city truly unique.
So join us as we explore the heart and soul of Nashville through the eyes of those who know it best.
Well, today we're excited to have Elliot Pinsly, a distinguished licensed clinical social worker and the Chief Executive Officer of the Behavioral Health Foundation. With a deep-seated passion for advanced mental health, addiction care, and criminal justice reform, Elliot's leadership at the Behavioral Health Foundation has been pivotal.
Ooh, I like that. Pivotal. I was just thinking this is going to be a serious one today, isn't it? And then you go with pivotal.
In implementing data-driven, nonpartisan policy changes. His career spans critical roles in healthcare consulting and direct clinical work, including significant stints at Centerstone and the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Elliot's dedication to systems change and strategic advocacy. What is happening?
I am loving this.
Oh, Lord.
He usually is like precise and perfect in everything he does.
It's just water.
It is just water.
Has enabled the development of innovative behavioral health programs that profoundly impact communities and individuals across Nashville and beyond.
Wow, that was awesome.
That was a great bio. That was good.
Well, Elliot, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Worried we were going to be so serious today. You just started it right.
Well,
it's okay. We got to have fun, right?
Welcome. Yes.
So how'd you get started?
How to get started? The Behavioral Health Foundation is me or the Behavioral Health Foundation?
I think we start with you first.
Well, I don't want to explain the origination of all that. That's too far. But I went to college at Tulane. I'm from Nashville.
Okay.
Born and raised. Went to Tulane University.
Wow, you're a rare person. Born and raised in Nashville.
Yeah.
Everybody here seems to be a transplant.
Yeah, I was. I'm not a kidney or a liver.
Right.
Definitely. Wow. Yeah. On the west side of town, Bellevue kind of area. And then my parents have been around for a long time. So yes, Nashville is my home. Moved to New Orleans for about 6 years or so. That was both before and after Hurricane Katrina. So it was an interesting time to go to school down there, and got my master's in social work. I was going to go to medical school or dental school at the time. Thought I was going to be an orthodontist. I was like, had this whole plan. Hey, there's plenty of people that need their teeth straightened.
Right.
Costs a good amount of money. Steady. I was like, I'm going to be bored. I'm just going to be bored. So
his son is pursuing.
That's what my son's going.
Hey, I think it's a great way to make a living. Absolutely. But I think just consider, whether that'll be fulfilling. I think that's just me.
It will be filling. I mean, they make fillings. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Those are regular dentists, I think. That's okay.
Well, who knows what kind he's going to be.
Well, either way, so I decided to disappoint my parents and go to a field that pays a whole lot less money.
We've all done it.
Yes. And so I decided to go to social work program. Right. And that was at Tulane, and just had a professor as an undergrad that taught a class on child and family violence. And I was just like, this is interesting. I want to learn more about this. Wow. How do we fix this? Wow. How do we help people? So started that, and they train you to be a clinician, but that's not really what I wanted to do. Frankly, I didn't think I could be a therapist. I was just, not confident enough. Let's go solve a need. Let's build a program, an agency, something we can do. But yeah, that's probably not what I'm built for. But when I moved back to Nashville after graduating, and I got hired at the VA hospital here in Nashville and worked in the mental health clinic, and they hired me to basically call everybody who no-showed their appointments and check in on them, see if we can get them rescheduled, make sure they're doing okay. And that kind of evolved. Same kind of thing I mentioned earlier. It wasn't quite fulfilling enough just to stop there. And I, started working with a clinical supervisor, speaking of transplants from earlier, who works in the transplant unit at the VA. And she kicked my butt and basically said, no, you're going to be a therapist. And she helped me and, kind of made that happen.
Focus you in.
Yes. And so that was where my advocacy path probably started earlier. Is she helped me, and I say help meaning she semi-forced me, but
Yeah.
helped me advocate to the chief of psychiatry and the head of the mental health clinic over there to start a psychotherapy clinic, which no social worker had ever done at the VA system here. And I think it took 2 tries, and on the second try, I got a yes, and started doing some therapy and started doing some more work there. So that job kind of took me. Frankly, it was I wanted to work with kids. That's children, families was my priority. I loved working with veterans. I thought it was a great place to be. People who really need a lot of help. But when an opportunity opened at a company called Centerstone, a big nonprofit that started here in Tennessee, they're in numerous states. There was an intensive in-home treatment job, which was therapy, going to the homes of kids and families multiple times a week. It paid very poorly, but it was as not nitty gritty. It was as on the ground. Really, you are doing the hardest work imaginable in this kind of field.
Sure.
Because I'm working with kids who are at risk of dying, either killing themselves, killing somebody else, at risk for being put in the psych hospital, at risk for going into state's custody, families at the brink, basically, and with lots and lots of needs. And going to places in Nashville that I did not know existed when I grew up.
Yeah.
My parents, sheltered us and did not bring us to areas,
Sure.
and really realizing where there were pockets of poverty and need and all sorts of things that, maybe we, as someone who was privileged and grew up at, I went to private school here in town and, didn't get to experience. So I was kind of immersed in that environment, and I just really enjoyed working with people. But I relatively quickly got promoted into a kind of an outreach role, trying to help build, grow, and expand that program at Centerstone and do some other things. But after a decade, I spent a decade there. I was director of marketing and business development. So on the management team, working with programs all across the state of Tennessee and North Georgia and in Southern Kentucky. So did a lot there. In 2016, I got engaged with what is now called the Tennessee Diversion Coalition, which was started by Judge Dan Eisenstein. He was the second mental health court judge in Nashville back when we were one of the only mental health courts in the entire United States. And he stopped running for election, and so he could be a little bit more open, and was like, thanks for all the money you've given us to help people with mental health issues in our court system, but what the heck are we doing? Let's help them before they get here. Let's stop arresting people. Let's give them help in the community. And so he knew me from personal, we're both Jewish and Jewish community. And so that's kind of, at least at the time, was relatively small in Nashville. And so, I was his Centerstone guy. He called people from all these other agencies. We got together at the West Nashville Police Precinct and just said, let's do something. And so I ended up volunteering or being voluntold, if you will, when a judge tells you to do something, it's voluntold. But to basically, what kind of data can we put together? Now, I had no experience in doing this, putting these things together, other than marketing data and selling programs and services, those kinds of things. And so I got together with a bunch of folks. I called people in other states, and I spit out a brief on paper. It was maybe 4 or 5 pages, and did my best trying to figure out how can we make a compelling argument to do what we need to help people with mental health issues. And we had decided around 24/7 crisis walk-in centers, and how can we expand and build those throughout Nashville, throughout the state, so that police have another option to take people instead of to jail. And that's where we focused. So we asked for $10 million, and we got $15 million. And I say we, for the state of Tennessee, for the people of Tennessee. It went to the Department of Mental Health. And so we started meeting in August of 2016. And by December of that same year, we had a commitment for that $15 million investment from the deputy governor and the state's commissioner of finance. And that led to the building of the Mental Health Cooperatives Crisis Treatment Center that's now available down in Metro Center here, and numerous other programs throughout the state. It led to...
And that's for kids?
No, these are for adults.
Okay.
They do have services, and actually they just got a grant. So this work continues and has continued to develop. So they actually just got a grant from the state to build the first child and youth walk-in center and crisis stabilization unit in Middle Tennessee area. So there's another one coming in Memphis. There's one in Knoxville. So, just really cool to see that. And so I'm getting to the Behavioral Health Foundation kind of arc here by saying, this was really when I realized wow, advocacy can be really powerful, but we've got to figure out a way to use it right. Got to get the right people. Sometimes you may need a judge. Sometimes you don't.
Right.
Sometimes you need law enforcement. Sometimes you need lots of CEOs. Sometimes you need people from all over the state. But you got to figure out the right timing, the right people, and make a very compelling ask, and then you can help a lot of people.
Right.
Because before that, I'd been involved in a lot of different coalition meetings, advocacy conversations, and frankly, a lot of things going nowhere. I mean, lots of good talk and lots of good ideas, but no real cohesion across agencies and organizations. Lots of competition, whether they want to admit it or not.
Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, especially back at that time. I know that's not that long ago, but 8 years prior to today, there was not a lot of money out there for mental health care.
Gotcha.
There's been a lot more added. The Department of Mental Health budget in Tennessee, for example, has grown tremendously in the last decade or so. But that I mentioned when we got that first $15 million, for these crisis walk-in centers and such, that brief we put together, the stat that was most compelling, as it turned out, was where we looked at the state budget. So the state budget over a 10-year period prior to that, I mean, I'm somewhere between 2005, 2015, just roughly. I don't have it in front of me. And you looked at the Department of Mental Health budget, the state as a whole, and the Department of Corrections, that manages prisons.
Sure.
The Department of Corrections budget had grown over 50% in that period of time. The state's budget as a whole had grown about 25%. But the Department of Mental Health budget had actually gone down when you take into account inflation. That was pretty compelling to show how we are not pacing the investments that we need to help people with mental health and addiction issues in this state. And it got attention. It helped. And learning that we can take a small tidbit like that and really get people to pay attention was really exciting. It's empowering. And so that's kind of where the Behavioral Health Foundation sits. Is we are a nonprofit 501c3 policy research and strategic advocacy center that focuses on state level policy. Tennessee is where we focus a lot of our energy right now, especially early going. But we are not exclusively focused on the state of Tennessee. We are different than other organizations that do a lot of work in DC, a lot of federal policy advocacy. We do get involved. We sign on and support certain pieces of legislation at the federal level, but that's not our bread and butter. We focus on how do we provide the right information, the right resources, the right data, the right ideas to state legislatures and those that are advocating to state legislatures to enact good, positive policies that can positively impact the lives of people with mental health and addiction issues. And I'll quickly clarify that that's different than necessarily advocating on behalf of the system, because the needs of the system don't always align with the needs of people who have these issues at the end of the day.
Gotcha.
So, there's a lot of providers, and very rightfully so, they're out there advocating for more money for them.
Sure.
But sometimes when it comes to civil and human rights, there's not many folks standing in their corner. So we're there to really look at the bigger picture. What can we do? And take things from one state to other and show, hey, it's working over here. Do you guys want to try this here? We give testimony, we propose legislation, we do our own research, and it's a whole lot of collaboration.
Wow.
So I guess talk to me a little bit about the correlation between mental health and addiction care. Do you find there's a lot of overlap with that, or how did that addiction care part, I guess, sort of come about when you were, I guess, primarily focused on mental health initially, I think, right?
Absolutely. So mental health broadly incorporates addiction and substance use disorder. So while I don't, buy into everything it says, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual is what we're trained on as therapists, what psychiatrists and other doctors are using to help diagnose mental health conditions. And one of those mental health conditions is a substance use disorder. And there's various types of substance use disorders, right? So earlier on in my career, I was focused more on mental health issues but there's so much overlap already. It's impossible to ignore addiction and substance use in that kind of work. With kids, sometimes it's not as obvious depending on the population and age of the kids you're working with. Like younger kids, you're not always seeing substance use issues, but they have parents, they have siblings, they have aunts and uncles and grandparents. So there is always a factor of substance use, or at least needing to assess for substance use in any situation you're in. So these are mental health issues. I just clarified when we talk about mental health that it is broader than what some people think of as depression, anxiety, trauma,
Right.
psychosis, those kinds of issues, to make sure it's clear that this includes substance use and addiction. And frankly, people are dying just as much, if not more, from addiction related issues as they are from mental health disorders. And we need to help everybody and look holistically. But it's there's a term for it. It's called co-occurring issues or co-occurring disorders, when you have people who have ongoing mental health issues as well as substance use issues.
So Van and I actually met.
I was like, where are you going with this?
Yeah, not
Hey,
not
hey, hey,
there.
hey, be careful.
We actually
He's so
met
rude
years ago.
sometimes.
Years ago,
Yeah.
in a leadership program, and we kind of both sucked each other into our nonprofit world. But part of all of this was developing a youth program, and sort of started getting to get involved with the school systems, and
It was a
yeah,
leadership
yeah,
program for some
it was
high
more
schools.
around a poverty issue, but it was pretty eye opening because we both live up in Sumner County, and there's a lot of wealth around us, and so we didn't realize what a big problem
Sure,
poverty and homelessness was, in our own backyard.
that's right.
As we started getting out there, seeing this, it's I don't think people are aware of how big some of these issues are, just because they don't pay attention to it.
Well, if you don't
On a
see
day to day.
people sleeping on
Yeah,
sidewalks or
and
whatever, you don't know that it's literally in your own backyard.
yeah, and a lot of what we ran across, I think there's some overlap with mental health, because there is depression and those kinds of things that a lot of these people are dealing with, and addiction, and you end up dealing with, you're trying to help the kids when the parents are
Sure.
not necessarily working with you to help the kids. But I'm curious if you kind of were seeing the same thing with mental health. It's like it's a bigger problem than people realize. If you're not paying attention to it day to day, you kind of
Strangely enough,
gloss
this
over.
is the basis of our friendship.
All right.
People don't know that side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, so there's a lot of stigma. That's
true.
one word.
Sure.
Taboo in certain families, cultures. It could be.
Right.
We don't talk about things. There's nothing wrong with you. I'll actually jump to a more significant example of, the child or teenager or young adult who goes to their parents and said, "Hey, I've been thinking and like planning out whether I want to kill myself." Right. And then you have everything. Why would you ever want to do that? And it's just this immediate, why we're not going to talk about that. We're going to do that. And it
Sure.
honestly makes it worse. That's a terrible response. So I hope no one listening is going to consider
It's a
trying to
fear-based
do that.
response.
Yes. I mean,
Sure.
it's a very non-supportive and can actually lead things in the wrong direction. But it's just something we're not used to talking about all the time.
Right.
And we need to change that. We go early on in life to a doctor. We
Right.
start at birth, literally. We have annual checkups as kids. We're required to get different things to go to school and etc.
Sure.
But the same is not true for our mental health. Now, it's not exactly the same when you look and compare physical health to mental health. And I know people have tried. I don't think it's similar in that way, but it's about living in life and how we respond to life, to distress, to trauma, to different things that happen. And everyone's different. And some people can respond to traumas and different disasters, whatever it may be, differently based on resiliency factors. So that could be how much money you have, supports in your family or community. Do you have someone you can talk to that you trust, right? Those kinds of things. But back at a basic level, a lot of people don't even have the basic words to use to describe more than like a couple feelings: happy, sad, angry. That sometimes can be it. And I've worked with kids and their parents, and that can be really challenging to get them to really start talking beyond that. So are we really teaching young people the right skills growing up? How do we make sure we're educating them on history and math and science? But I think we have an obligation to young people to teach them how to express themselves in a way that, someone else could understand, and that so they understand how to reach out for help, to talk, just to digest the world. But, a lot of times too, we are jumping to conclusions with these kids as they get older and pointing fingers. This kid's got this problem, or I'm not dismissing ADHD, but blaming it as ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder is something we hear. It's like, they're just kids. This is especially now. I was talking to a young person at a store earlier today, actually, who's 20 and was telling me about this experience. And it's a really hard time to have grown up in those last few years and gotten older, gone through adolescence, social media,
Sure.
polarization in politics, everything else we're looking at, pandemic, all these
Mhm.
things. So it's really, really hard. And frankly, there's a lot of things that are out there beyond substances that are addicting young people and
Right.
older people
Sure.
as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to keep in mind with this, but we absolutely need to be very thoughtful about our mental health. We need to be taking care of our mental health the same way we take care of our physical health.
Right.
And we need to just make sure we're doing the right things for our body. And basically, it really starts with our basic needs. I'm not sure if you've heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you ever taken
Yes.
psychology class, but we're talking about food, security, shelter, sleep, those kinds of things.
Right.
You talked about homelessness. This is all related as well. But a lot of times with mental health, we say, oh, something's wrong with you. Let's give you a prescription for that.
Right.
Or
Gotcha.
frankly, the system kind of requires us to put a diagnosis, a label on somebody the first time we see them.
Oh, really?
That's how you get paid through insurance, right?
Gotcha.
It's not exactly the best model in reality because we're having to take someone we just saw who we haven't built a relationship with, and we're trying to get enough out of them to decide, here's a diagnosis that we're going to put on you. And yes, it doesn't necessarily have to be permanent. But once one of those type of diagnoses goes in, especially if it's something like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or something like that, it has a tendency to stick with the person. But
Gotcha.
we're not really looking at the basic underlying factors like, is this person sleeping? Are they eating well?
Right.
What's their
Right.
social support look like? All those different things. And so I think we need things like medication as options, hospitalization as options, but we're using them more as blunt instruments right now, and it's kind of problematic.
So this is what the Behavioral Health Foundation does. They advocate for change, or they advocate what's the role?
That's great. Yes, absolutely. In certain ways, we advocate for change. In other ways, we are there to provide information factually on different policies. So I'll give one example from this past legislative session. There was a piece of legislation that was related to when situations where someone is overdosing on like an opioid or some other type of substance, and we have Good Samaritan law protections in Tennessee, which basically gives immunity protections in certain circumstances when you call when when someone else is overdosing, the person overdosing and the person calling have protections. Let's say they found
Okay.
drug residue or they even found out you had a small drug transaction right there. Their call, we're not here. That's not what we're here. We want to save this
Right.
person's life and do all this. However, there's still a lot of reasons that people don't call, which we could talk about later if we'd like. But this bill was trying to create what would have been the nation's first bad Samaritan law, as I've called
Ooh.
it, which basically would have created a misdemeanor penalty for any bystander that did not call for medical assistance if somebody might be overdosing.
Like the last episode of Seinfeld, where they didn't call, and so did you ever see that?
I don't know what you're
That's
talking
not the end of Seinfeld. The last episode, they were in a private jet. They had to stop. Something happened. They didn't stop a mugging. They all ended up in
I
prison
remember they were all in jail, but I don't
because they
I
didn't
remember
help.
why.
That
They
was the
didn't-
whole thing. It would have been and is it? Don't you come from a entertainment family
I have some
in New
siblings.
York?
Yes.
Did your family? Did your sister write that episode?
No, I don't believe
Wouldn't
so.
that be amazing?
Yes. No,
he wrote the legislation and she wrote the episode.
yeah, don't blame me for the last episode of Seinfeld.
Oh, I was so disappointed.
No.
So what happened to this legislation?
So this legislation, so there was this came out of from a representative out of Murray County, and one of his constituents, her sister had passed away and had overdosed, and no one called for anybody help, and so there was a lot of emotions, as you can imagine,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And wanting to do something and wanting to make change, and I think it was well intended. I just don't think they understood the unintended consequences that come with policies like this. So our role in this situation was first find that this was even filed in Tennessee. So we're monitoring, and then we're taking a look and analyzing and seeing, hey, what does this look like? Is this something we may need to chime in on, or may want to talk to legislators about? A lot of times legislators come to us, whether it's at the early stages about designing legislation, or afterwards. But sometimes we're catching it. And this is one of those situations where we were catching it.
So you were consulting on this legislation. Is that how
on behalf of the public, not on behalf of
the-
anyone in particular.
Okay. I was just trying to understand.
So we're here to make sure that these,
Yeah.
we're to the extent we have
'Cause
any
that's
ability.
serious. I mean, that's a touchy subject. If
It is.
somebody's family member passed and they want some retribution, but they're not wanting it to happen to anybody else's family, and you understand where their motivation comes
Oh,
from.
100%. Absolutely. I don't blame the person one bit for jumping to that,
Right.
and thinking and wanting something to happen. And I believe, this constituent thought, this would help
Right.
prevent other people from dying.
But my goodness, what it could mean.
But the opposite
Wow.
is likely true, right? Because
Right.
people are already scared of being charged with drug-induced homicide.
Yeah.
Right now, it could happen in Davidson County or anywhere else. If you call 911, you had provided drugs to somebody. Let's say whether you charged them $5 for it or not, or handed it to a friend, they overdose, right?
Yes.
And if you stay there, do what we would hope you would do as a good Samaritan, call 911. Administer naloxone or Narcan, which is an overdose reversal medication.
Mhm.
Do CPR. Do whatever you're asked by 911. Stay there. Wait until first responders arrive.
Right.
You're trying everything possible to keep this person alive, but something happens and they don't make it.
Right.
You could be charged with second degree, the equivalent of second degree murder or second degree murder.
Right.
That's scary. That's a very scary thought for someone who, in that situation, is a well-meaning citizen who happened to have provided a substance to somebody. We're not talking about cartel members, which I think is the focus of those type of policies, but unfortunately other people can get sucked up in that. So for example, in I think it was Fayette County, Tennessee, in the 1 to 2 years ago, there were some teenagers who overdosed in a parking lot outside of school. I want to say 16, 17-year-olds. And I believe two of them died, at least one of them died, but I think two of them died and one of them survived. And the one who survived was charged with second degree murder, right? So I personally, and I think the literature would also back me up, that that's not necessarily a helpful policy in terms of helping keep people alive or prevent future drug use. It unfortunately is something that is punishing that person that we really need to get some help, and also disincentivizing other people from calling for help and pushing people further and further underground.
So you're saying this law that we do have would protect that person now?
We have,
if they call 911.
We are, so that's very complicated because there's a set of laws, and I'm
just trying to,
No, this is great.
I'm a simple person here.
I'll get you.
So.
We have Good Samaritan laws in place. The drug-induced homicide laws, which have been put on the books in the last few years, they are exceptions to that Good Samaritan law, right? So those have been added in. So it's not just you're a Good Samaritan, we're not going to arrest you. It's we're not going to arrest you unless you're a major drug dealer, which is fair. That was always on the books. Or, the person dies, right? And that's where we're getting to this tricky area. So when we're looking at adding more criminal penalties now to the bystander, not toward the person overdosing, that makes it even more complicated. And frankly, we don't want anybody to have to think about what I might or might not be charged with or what this person might. We just want them to call. Just call. And so that's why we need to build up our Good Samaritan law. We tried and partially were able to change that law through a proposal that I wrote and we submitted through the Behavioral Health Foundation, through Department of Mental Health Planning and Policy Council, and it was picked up by the governor. It was amended. We tried to get rid of this one-time overdose limit exception. So right now, the law in Tennessee, before this, the law in Tennessee said if you've ever overdosed before and now you're the person overdosing, you don't get immunity protection, right? So one time, that's not the nature of addiction. That's not really helpful. Not best practice policy. So we wrote a pitch to get rid of that one-time overdose limit. So now that moved, but not the same way. And now DAs and local police, law enforcement, they can apply those immunity protections at second and subsequent overdoses if they choose to, but it's up to the local law enforcement to do that, which makes it extremely difficult for us to advertise to people, put billboards up or educate, hey, just call 911. You're not going to get arrested. It's just not always true. Gotcha. So those were some of the concerns with this other approach. And really criminalizing inaction is a very slippery slope we have to be careful of.
So advocating like this has become a passion for you. I mean, just listening to you talk.
Yes, it is. And it's.
Did you expect when you got into all this that that's where you would end up?
No, not even close. I honestly am someone who used to say, and probably still says, I unabashedly hate politics.
Right.
I really just the two-party system and all of that, and how it just pits people against each other. I can't stand. And I never really thought I'd get into this kind of work.
Yeah.
But it was really through that coalition that I mentioned and some other work. I just realized there's a need for it.
Well, it sounds like you can
change.
work with every side.
That's what we do.
I mean, it sounds like you can really, man.
So we are there
to,
advocating for fact and people, right? So I was allowed to, I gave testimony on this piece of legislation. I brought a mom with me from Signal Mountain, Tennessee, who had lost a child as well. We testified about our concerns about this legislation, not asking them to vote against it, just meeting with all these legislators who are on the committee. This is the criminal justice subcommittee looking at this, meeting with the bill sponsors, and they don't always like when we come in talking and saying we have concerns about their legislation. And sometimes they listen, sometimes they, shove us out the door.
Well, addiction hits left and right and center, and
100%.
Man,
it does. So that's what we're doing. We're trying to use good information, talking points, strategy to help lead folks to the water, if you will, so they can drink in the pool that's actually going to help people, not going to harm.
Right. Wow.
I feel like we hear about a lot of the addiction issues in waves. Like for a while there, all the talk was around meth, and then it was all opioids, and then it was all fentanyl. Like, what do you see? Like, what are the biggest issues we're dealing with right now? Either things that are in place, in the law right now that are problematic, or what are the holes where we need something to help with some of the big issues?
Great question. And I'll start by saying the meth epidemic in Tennessee has never gone away. It's just been overshadowed as we've seen the opioid epidemic kind of take center stage. And then you see the rise of fentanyl. Fentanyl is an opioid. It's a synthetic opioid, extremely powerful, much more powerful than heroin. And there is really no heroin in Nashville that I'm aware of. It is fentanyl. It might be sold as heroin, but it's fentanyl. It's now being mixed with other things like xylazine, which is a synthetic sedative that's meant for veterinary use, never approved for human use. And it's causing people to die. And not it's not responsive to naloxone, the overdose reversal drug, and it can actually lead to horrible skin wounds and sores. So creating more and more problems for people, and lots of victims of folks who are trapped in this cycle of addiction. No one's wanting to go smoke or shoot or whatever they're going to do with a substance and experience that. I mean, they're trapped. They need help. And offering that help is what's most important. So I think where we really need to invest our dollars is in good quality services and treatment. So some things that we're working toward are looking at access to buprenorphine. That's the buprenorphine, and combined with naloxone is known as Suboxone, the name brand drug. Things like methadone that have been around much longer, but medications that can be very helpful for people with opioid use disorder, but are still grossly underutilized. I mean, the data is showing that methadone is the most effective treatment for opioid use disorder, followed by buprenorphine treatment. Now, this is ideally combined with counseling and other services as well, but we're just not offering access to it. And Tennessee it still limits nurse practitioner prescribing of these medications. And there's been a lot of limits at the federal level too, but law enforcement look at it as just another opioid, but frankly, it can be essentially a cure for many people and help people immediately get help. Think about, you could think about you, your friend, whoever, in a situation where, let's say you got stuck into some spiral of addiction. You didn't know how you got there. It's embarrassing. It's horrible. You're worried about yourself, your family, whatever. Maybe your bank account's getting drained because of how much you're spending, all these other things. And if you have to go to residential treatment, which is typically the route, detox, painful. If anybody's seen movies like Train Spotting or other things, it's not a pleasant experience to withdraw from, substances that are opioids and others, right? That can be extremely scary for people. But then you go to, treatment thereafter, and often that's at least, 3 to 4 weeks, if not longer, ideally. I mean, the research shows 6 months is what's really needed to help people prevent relapse in addiction treatment. But you can't really hide that from anyone. And I'm not suggesting you should, but a lot of people don't want to admit to their employer because that's not going to have their job maintained for them, or their family member, or sometimes even a boyfriend, girlfriend, or spouse, right? Or children. Just think about these situations. But there are medications that exist that are out there where someone could go literally, you used yesterday, you don't want to use again, or you don't want to go out and get more, you can't. You could go the very next day, talk to somebody, take a medication, and within a couple hours feel quote unquote normal again and be able to start resetting your life. And then
Wow.
work under the care of a doctor or a nurse practitioner to help you continue and move forward. So we have these tools. We're just underutilizing them.
Mhm.
We need to do better education on fentanyl test strips. That's another thing the Behavioral Health Foundation did. I wrote a legislative proposal to decriminalize these test strips that test for fentanyl so that people who are not wanting it in a pill that they think is a Xanax or something they think is something else, they can actually test the substance and see yes or no if it has fentanyl in it. Costs less than $1 for these strips, but it was illegal drug paraphernalia until we put on paper or something, submitted it through a formal process, and then got the governor to move forward with it.
So it's legal now to
They're legal in Tennessee.
test strips. Wow.
Hmm.
How do we hear about that fentanyl stuff, and we you hear all this fear-based stuff. Tell our kids, don't pick up money on the ground if you see money, and like is it really all that?
No, that's a huge myth. So that's been debunked many times over by expert
Please tell me I
toxicologists.
can sleep better.
Yes. No, unfortunately, a local news station perpetuated that myth by talking about some tourist or somebody who
Yeah.
found a dollar bill.
Oh
rolled up
yeah, my
and
kids talk
fentanyl.
about it.
And again, we love our law enforcement partners. We work very closely with law enforcement, but sometimes people do, not realize what's happening during an experience, and it can be very frightening when you hear from others, "Oh, you touch fentanyl, you can overdose and die."
Right,
And
right.
let's say someone does come in contact, and law enforcement happens to be more likely than others, and then people start freaking out, right? And they may
Yes.
pass out, and then they're administered the overdose reversal drug naloxone, for example,
Oh.
and they wake up, right? Well, that's because they revive from their panic attack many times, right? People can have panic attacks, can mimic physical health symptoms as well.
Right.
I'm not saying every situation is like that, but unless fentanyl goes significantly into a mucous membrane or intravenously, you're not going to overdose.
So you're saying if I pick up $1 on the street,
if you had a pile of fentanyl powder right here and put your hand in it, unless you had an open wound, nothing's going to happen to you.
I'm gonna sleep better tonight.
So
I think about these things.
Yes. Well, no, a lot of people do, and it's very important. And
yes.
we want to treat people who are, that's a lot of things with methamphetamine too.
Right,
People went into homes with hazmat suits, and sometimes for good reason in that, right? But at the end of these are people who are suffering, people who need help, people who have typically a lot of times had a hard life, a lot of things not go their way, not a lot of those resiliency factors, and they need a hand, they need help, they want support. But if we treat them as if, ooh, I can't get near you, hands off, or scary, then it makes it harder and further disconnects the people that need help from the people that can possibly help them.
Man,
it's such a complicated issue. You've got people that talk about the border issue is, causing the big fentanyl problem.
Oh, we're gonna go there?
Sure, why not?
Oh my goodness,
go for it.
Oh my goodness, no.
You've got people that talk about how there was an incentive for overprescribing opioids. There was monetary incentives from the big pharma companies. Like, it's just so complicated. But in your opinion, you've studied all this stuff. Like, where do you think this went off the rails? Like, how did this become such a problem?
Well, that's difficult to say exactly.
I was going to say, wow, do tell.
No, when we're talking about the opioid epidemic, obviously, heroin had been around for a very long time.
Yeah.
People have used that, but we saw a spike with marketing. Yes. So, I know you've had other guests that are good marketers, not saying for pharmaceutical industries.
Actually, yes.
Yeah. So, but that marketing and sales machines, are a big part of what fueled the opioid epidemic. Greed. Corporate greed and profiteering and not caring about people, frankly. And intentionally hiding data or misconstruing data on purpose. The barrier.
Not that all of them do.
No, not all of them. No,
I love me some pharma.
No, everybody should have an option, but we need to understand. But a lot of people don't understand that the FDA doesn't require that drug companies show them all of their data before they approve. So if you have things trials that didn't look good, you don't have to show that, right?
Well, you got to expect they're going to have some failure before they have some success.
Well, potentially, yes. But like, so for example, with Xanax, I mean,
Oh yeah.
so
Sure.
that's, we talked about that already a little bit, I think, or it came up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Xanax, the story of how Xanax came to market, this was told in a
Do tell.
documentary. I'm forgetting the name of it off the top of my head, but I can find it later. But this is basically, it was a 3-part trial. Like, it was broken into thirds, but it was longer. I don't remember the number of weeks. So whether it was 12 or 24, something like that, I can't remember off the top of my head. But it was a longer trial than some of the other safety trials. So
Gotcha.
it was, Xanax was being tested to treat acute panic attacks, anxiety, serious anxiety in the moment, right? At the time. So in the first third of this trial, Xanax worked great compared to the control, the placebo population. It really did a good job at reducing panic and anxiety in people. Now, when you look at the middle part of that trial, by the end of it, there was no difference between the treatment group and the control group. So the people getting Xanax, they were doing no better in terms of their panic anxiety than the other group. So no, you didn't see any benefit anymore at that point from the Xanax. Then in the last third of the trial, a massive spike in the curve of people who were taking the Xanax in the trial. They had severe anxiety and panic. And the reason for this is most likely because of withdrawal that started happening in their system. Their tolerance started to build for what is a very addictive benzodiazepine.
Gotcha.
And so now people are starting to become addicted to medication that they've been taking for longer than they probably should have been taking it. And so their system is craving more, but they're not getting any more. And that's how we start to have, people who are now seeking out higher and higher quantities that are more and more dangerous. But when the drug company went to the FDA, my understanding is they did not have to reveal anything but the first third of that trial data and hid the rest.
Gotcha.
So, hey, it worked great for the first third, but who cares about everything else we learned? That's not helpful to the public. It's very helpful for profits. Again, I think no matter what, people should have a choice. And I'm probably going to sound I'm going to either blow your mind right now or I'm going to sound like a quack. But if one of the most commonly prescribed types of medications in the United States, and I want to clarify, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm not a psychopharmacologist or anything like that, but I've done a lot of research. But SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, these are antidepressants like Prozac, for example, very commonly prescribed. But the research community, scientific community, has pretty much is centered around the idea that these are debunked, that these do not do what the drug companies have said and claim that they do, and that they seem to be glorified placebo with significant black box warnings at the end if you stop taking it cold turkey or as you're transitioning off.
Gotcha.
So one of the most common things we're prescribing to people is something that may not only not help, but may actually cause more harm than good in some situations. In some folks, placebo can be extremely powerful.
Right.
But the whole point is we need options for people. And we need to, if you want medications, let's make sure there's a medication that you can have available.
But if you're watching this, talk to your doctor. Don't go by anything you're hearing here.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Please do not stop taking your medicine. Talk to your doctor.
No, you absolutely should not just stop taking anything without talking to your physician,
please,
or your nurse practitioner. And absolutely don't take anything off the street, period, the end. Because if it's a pill, it may look like a Xanax. It may look like talked something else. It could look like an Adderall. We're seeing this, but the DEA is finding that a huge number of these pills contain fentanyl, and people can die who have no opioid tolerance.
Right. Wow. This is hardcore.
Hey, these are people's lives. That's why we do what we do.
I love your passion.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So you worked with the VA as well. It talks about the intersection of mental health services for veterans versus the broader community.
Well, it's delivered through the federal government, so it's a little bit different. I mean, there are some services available through state-funded channels and through private nonprofits. When I was at Centerstone, for example, actually, do you know who Stephen Cohen is? He's billionaire, hedge fund manager, now owner of the Mets.
Right.
But his son served in the military, and when I was director of marketing and business development at Centerstone, I worked with the Cohen Veterans Network, which was Stephen Cohen's a nonprofit he created, to build clinics all across the country, specifically to provide care for military veterans and their family members at no cost.
Cool.
So this is privatized nonprofit care. And so I got to be part of the team that helped open the first clinic in this area of the country, in Clarksville, Tennessee, where near Fort Campbell, near a military base. And so those kind of services are very helpful. But really, this is a population of individuals that have a high, very vulnerable population, lots of
Right.
needs, and they need lots of services available. But everybody is vulnerable to mental health issues.
Right.
Everybody's vulnerable to addiction. So we just need to make sure that we're funding services for all different groups of people at the same levels. And the VA has been improving things, doing a lot of good work. They've been putting out fact sheets on some of the new substances that are emerging that we need to keep up and look at. But frankly, there's not a ton of coordination, collaboration between the delivery of mental health care at the federal level or addiction treatment and that at the state or local level. So I think we have a ways to go to keep making sure everybody's talking to each other and avoid some silos when it comes to government.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier about the importance of education. Some of the work that we were doing, that we were talking about, it seemed like a big part of the issue was just a generational education issue. Like they just saw it had always been done and just they didn't know any better, had never been told otherwise. How much of what you do is kind of moved into like the education side of it, and ultimately what would you like to see happen with education around mental health and addiction?
Absolutely. Great question. So we don't do a ton of direct education of individuals at the front lines, regular citizens, our neighbors, all of that. But we are educating lawmakers, as I said, policymakers, organization leaders, agents, like association heads. And we do a lot of media engagement. So I do a lot of work with local journalists, with national investigative journalists. Some of it you'll see, us mentioned in a story. A lot of it is happening behind the scenes. So a lot of education happens through the bigger mouthpieces, and how can we work in those directions? We need to build up our website. We're a small nonprofit that started in the middle of pandemic with very little to no funding and really are still going. So jumped right into the work. How do we build up a team? How do we do all this? So we will be doing a little bit more education in terms of advocacy opportunities, public policy issues, what's happening, provide the fuel for advocates to run with. And that's really what we need. But we are looking, and we're partnering with the University of Tennessee. It's in early stages right now. We're looking at how can we pilot a unique initiative that we've been incubating. It's an idea I've had for a while, starting back when I was a therapist for kids, which is how can we help prepare people for whatever comes at them? How do we help people self-regulate, keep themselves cool enough so that they don't get into situations where you're kicked out of school, you're in a fight, you're punched, you're kicked, you're killed, whatever it may be, right? Or abused by a parent, for example. So deep breathing. Most people are familiar with basic deep breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth, but slowly in both ways.
Right.
Otherwise called deep belly breathing. There's other terms for it, but there's not a lot of money in that, right? Because how do you build a curriculum after breathing? I mean, you can't really copyright or trademark deep breathing. So people tend to pair that with other things: movement, yoga, meditation, mindfulness, etc., which is great. However, we need to look at what we know actually helps and works in the moment and take a look. Can we isolate deep breathing, and can we teach young people how to take deep breaths in a way that maybe becomes a reflex or a cued reflex? So I imagine a scenario in a school, for example, which instead of taking a young child who's in, I'm making up, second or third grade, who's having a hard time, that things aren't going well at home, they show up to school, they're mad, they got a bad grade, and they scream and yell and shout, and they start freaking out, yelling at the teacher, cursing. What we typically do nowadays is likely to send that kid out of the classroom, right? Or put them in the back of the classroom, whatever it may be, which is not going to really help that person feel a whole lot better in that moment. And a lot of times teachers don't have much of a choice because they don't really have a lot of support. Classrooms are huge, all those other kinds of things. But could you imagine if a teacher had the tool themselves and these kids had the tools for the teacher to start like, okay, how about we all take a deep breath together? Make this about everybody working together, kind of cool the temperature and see if we can move on. And that's what we want to test. That's what I believe we can do, is we can teach young kids. And if we can, kindergarten teachers already get on the floor all the time with kids. What if we use them? We don't need to bring in high paid consultants or specialized professionals to stay and pay them every year on top of teachers. We can use the teachers we have to actually teach key skills. So things like that, the emotional literacy that we talked about earlier, those issues I think can really be important. But we have to change the systems to make mental health care more desirable. Frankly, I don't know if do you know how people get to the psychiatric hospital in most cases?
No idea.
So let's say you're feeling suicidal, you worry you might hurt yourself, and someone calls 988. That's a 3-digit mental crisis number for like 911, but for mental health emergencies. Or someone calls 911. Likely someone's going to show up. Then there's a crisis assessment that may or may not be done, depending on what insurance you have or the situation. And they decide you might need to go to the psychiatric hospital. Typically, that's going to be an involuntary situation at that point. And it's going to most often be law enforcement taking you in the back of a law enforcement vehicle, most often in handcuffs.
Wow.
So that's healthcare. I don't believe that's actually healthcare. That's what we're calling it. So we need to move away from these things. We need to look at mental health care as something we want to actually provide to somebody where they go, when I asked for help last time, I got something that was helpful to me, not my rights and agency taken away, cuffs put on me, and medication forced into my arm.
Right.
If that's the experience you have, or you're waiting in a psychiatric or an emergency department for 3 or 4 days, waiting on a bed to open up somewhere as you're not allowed to leave, you're not allowed to do much, you're basically in hospital jail. I mean, that I don't see how on earth that helps a psychiatric emergency, a mental health crisis situation.
Seems like you would freak out.
Yeah, absolutely. People do. Absolutely. And there's been sheriffs that have talked about this, like, put me in that box for, like we're doing to these folks, I'm going to lose it. I'm going to assault somebody, right? That's what we're doing. We're not helping people. So we need to keep the options available, like hospitalization and medication, and use really good education. But there are programs and services available in other parts of the country and other countries that are working really well that we need to pilot in states like Tennessee so that we can find other ways to help people and make the mental health care system something that people want to reach out to.
Now, are there other criminal justice reforms you see that you think we need, or?
Well, we focus primarily on mental health and addiction related.
I'm sure there's a whole list.
There are, but I just want to be clear. We focus on the mental, not all of criminal justice reform.
Right.
We do anything intersecting with mental health and addiction. There's an opportunity on the table right now for the state of Tennessee to draw down money from the federal government to pay for up to 90 days of addiction treatment for people before they leave jail or prison. But we're not drawing down that money right now. It's an opportunity for state Medicaid agencies like TennCare in this situation. The Bureau of TennCare could submit a waiver amendment to the federal government and say, hey, yes, we'd like to take advantage of this. We'd like to start treating people, but we're bringing these issues up. The Behavioral Health Foundation is putting this out there. We're working with public policy officials and hoping to get more buy-in to actually take swift action on these issues. So that's a big advocacy bucket right there. So that's one is let's provide evidence-based treatment, and let's offer, I mentioned buprenorphine. Let's offer, they probably won't offer methadone in many situations just because there's more concerns than law enforcement about that. But buprenorphine, let's give people naloxone on the way out the door and fentanyl test strips, things to help them so that they don't get back into a bad situation immediately afterwards. And let's also make sure we get them housing, but we're kind of going the other direction too in some of this. Related to the Covenant shooting that we of course experienced in our city. There were a lot of policy initiatives that were put forward, for better or for worse, I think well-intended. But one of them I'm really concerned about is now if you go to the psychiatric hospital, if you're in any kind of involuntary psychiatric hospitalization situation, now it's required by state law that the hospital inform local law enforcement in the community where a person is discharging to. So let's say you came to a hospital in Nashville and you were going back home to Sumner County. They would have to call Sumner County Sheriff or Sumner County Police, let them know, hey, Van or, Steven is coming back out of this hospital and he's coming to your community. And that's a HIPAA violation. HIPAA is the privacy law, right? This is healthcare, right? This is someone's healthcare. And I don't see any necessary reason, but there's fear that's developed that mental health means violence, but it can't be further from the truth. The data shows that people with mental health issues are not significantly more likely to be violent than anybody else, but they are significantly more likely to be victims of violence.
Wow.
What's the pushback on the $90,000 thing? Like, why are they not wanting to do that?
Say that $90,000.
The 90 day.
The 90 day. Yeah.
Oh,
the 90,000.
Sorry, I was making sure I was understanding. So
the money that's available for that treatment.
They just don't know it exists.
Well, they know because I've let them know. So I know they know. It's politics is one, right? It's really confusing. I haven't gotten a direct response from the Bureau of TennCare on this. So I don't know exactly what their position would be. I've spoken to someone with corrections who's excited, would love to see this. I've spoken to, so how do we move in that direction is key. We actually were working to get a grant. We didn't get the grant, but we've got MOUs with all these organizations and groups I'm talking about. We're trying to find a way to systematically put things on paper and show, hey, here's what we're missing. Here's things we need, so that we can kind of, give folks a layup to say, okay, yes, we probably need to go in this direction. So we're working on that kind of legwork behind the scenes. But it's really just bureaucracy. It's not wanting federal control. I mean, Tennessee is one of a few states left that has not expanded Medicaid, right? Which expands, that basically allows Medicaid insurance coverage to working adults if they don't meet, or adults even if they're in poverty. Right now, people think, oh, if you're poor, you get Medicaid, you get 10 care. It's not at all true. Unless you're a parent of a young child or a child, you're a pregnant woman, you're not going to get Medicaid just because you're poor. That's why we see so much homelessness, all these other issues. We need to offer healthcare coverage to people. So we've got to find ways to do that. So Medicaid expansion is a huge policy initiative. If we could get more, young and working class adults who need healthcare coverage to access those benefits, we could help a whole lot of people. So it's things like that, but it's also, so Tennessee is, we don't want to go to the Biden administration right now and ask for this extra permission when we've already negotiated with the Trump administration a lot of flexibility, and we can do what we want. And the feds don't get as much of a say anymore. So they think very carefully about these things that might give the federal government a little bit more oversight when they've been pushing back on any federal oversight. I don't know if you heard, but there was a whole joint task force put together last summer, the state, a House and Senate, where they were looking at, can Tennessee refuse to accept federal education dollars and fund education ourselves in the state?
Wow. Are you able to help them kind of thread the needle through all that to be able to work with both sides on that?
Well, we do. I mean, whether we can, and again, on
Right.
the issues with
Able to
schools
see
and
through the issues so
Yeah.
that you can kind of thread that needle.
yes, we don't come in with guns blazing, or
Right.
when we're talking to folks, like, sometimes my conversations with certain lawmakers may look very different from one office to the
Right,
next.
right.
But we're there to just shoot folks straight. We're very different in that, I'm not a lobbyist. We're not there
Sure.
representing any special interests. We're truly representing the public. So we're just there telling them facts. Here's what we're seeing. Here's what concerns are. Here's what we
Right.
think is good. We'd love to work with you on X, Y, or Z. Let us know how we can help. So we're not there to sabotage. But of course, sometimes that comes into, we might be meeting with their colleagues to say that we have concerns about a bill.
Right,
There are
right.
just as many situations where we're meeting with colleagues to say how much we really like something, and we think that's very helpful. And a lot of times we're there just truly, if you have questions, let us know, and we'll go up there and answer whatever they have for us. So we're working the bigger needles to thread. Absolutely. That's why the Behavioral Health Foundation exists, is so that we can get that information to the right people, so that we can get the right balls rolling to help people. So right now we're maybe lifting a heavier load in terms of some of the direct advocacy, but my vision, our vision going forward is, I would love to empower more other people, other organization leaders, other individual advocates, people with lived experience, to have the information, tools, and know-how to go and talk to lawmakers and policymakers themselves.
Right, right. That's good.
So what are your goals for Behavioral Health Foundation? Like, where do you want to take it? What's next?
Well, we love to build up. We're still working on, how do we build up a good, solid fundraising base? How do we stabilize? How do we build a small team? So, it's, how do we take it from me and several interns and volunteers and research folks to, let's build a small team of dedicated people that are willing to go to work. So we need, I need someone monitoring legislation. We need somebody who can help schedule legislative appointments. We need someone out there building up newsletters and adding things to our website constantly, and adding all of these things. So in terms of the actual, business strategy and business, side of things, we just really need to get to where we have enough funding that we can focus squarely on the work. And frankly, the work came first, so the money didn't really matter as much at the beginning. Came in as a volunteer, and we've been working our way up. So getting new grants, starting to develop new partnerships with research universities and others, and so forth. But really, in 3 to 4 years, I hope we are stable in our fundraising. We develop a bigger board of directors, and we're able to really have all the resources that we need to advocate, not just in Tennessee, but to start providing similar resources to other states that need it. I don't really see us necessarily as having to do this work in other states. We can if there's need and there's resources available, but would love to work with other states and develop networks of individuals and policy leaders to share information across states, across regions, what's working, what's not, how did you do this, how can we get this done here. Those are things we're starting to work on now with leaders from across the country. But how do we move these things forward? How do we also take some of those bigger ideas I mentioned, the big systems change work, and keep that centered here so that we can explain to people, hey, we might need to look at things a little differently. Hey, have you looked at this model over here? But how do we convince people to pilot things and try something different instead of just doing the same thing over and over? That doesn't necessarily work. So, we're talking about mental health. You've probably heard this, the definition of insanity, trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? Well, we're putting tons and tons of money into mental health care right now, right? Tons, a lot more than we have before, which is fantastic to see. The need is not getting any better, unfortunately. To me, that's insane that we're not considering that maybe there's something different we need to be doing or adding. I know there are small things we're doing, but we're seeing Zimbabwe leading us in some ways and some of the creative programming they're doing. They have a program called Friendship Bench. It's really exciting. Literally, we don't have enough doctors. We don't have enough social workers. We don't have enough clinical workforce. So they use community members that look and sound like people that they're talking to. And they do just some problem solving work together, education, some support, and they connect them to ongoing peer support group, people that they can connect with what they want. No diagnosis, no long-term treatment, no medication unless they want it. But they compared that to what we do here in the United States, which is typically with medication, et cetera. And the depression outcomes were so much better in people who were treated in this Friendship Bench program than in traditional services that we do. So we just need to kind of keep our minds open and be willing to try new things and consider that, while there's a lot of money in healthcare, at the end of the day, we're here to serve people.
That's good. So if someone wants to get involved with your organization, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Absolutely. Well, I can be reached by email at Elliot, ELLIOT, at behavioralhealthfoundation.org. You can go to our website, behavioralhealthfoundation.org as well. And there's a phone number there. You can reach out. We have a donate now button. We appreciate any obviously donations. That's how we fuel our work. We are just a dedicated team, and pretty much every dollar goes directly in to the actual direct services work that we're doing. And even if people are not necessarily interested in donating, they want to just figure out, how do I get more involved and advocate? I want to go talk to I don't even know how to talk to a lawmaker. I'd be happy for anybody to give me a call.
Love it.
And I'll talk about it at any time.
Well, it just seems like this topic hits everybody at a different level. And my goodness, we've all been hit by all kinds of issues with COVID and all the things. And man, it's just it blows my mind.
Yeah, I feel like mental health issues increased with COVID.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it made it where people can talk about it. There are some things we didn't talk about a whole lot, but with that, everybody started talking about uncomfortable things other than just politics, and they started talking about the way things hit them, and they started debating things, which I don't always love, of course, but at least they started having conversations, and they started having to look each other in the eye, and the people in their own homes talking to each other. People were locked up in their homes, or neighbors, and people started having the conversations that maybe they didn't used to have.
Yes, and I think isolation is a huge factor in mental health, right? So there was a lot of isolation. Not everybody was, and sometimes it was too close of quarters. And
right.
Whether it's domestic violence or parental violence or emotional abuse, other kinds of things, it was very challenging. Now, some people might have really liked it, but a lot of people had a really hard time.
Right.
It seemed kind of end of days for a little while, right? It's scary. It's, people freak out. And that is distress. That is communal trauma that we all experience, and maybe in different ways, but we have some
hit everybody so differently. And then the traffic, people have been nuts. People have been absolutely nuts. Sorry, I probably shouldn't say nuts, should I? Oh. Is that wrong to say?
Well, that's what
I got to put it on my list.
I call things nuts and insane, but I'm not talking about people with mental health issues. I'm talking about systems
I'm just
and
talking
policies.
about road rage.
Yes,
that's all. That's all I'm talking about is road rage.
Yes,
it blows my mind. I'm like, it's fine. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I'll just finish by saying here that I think what we were just talking about with pandemic and the most important thing for people to take care of their mental health is to have a conversation with somebody about it.
That's good.
Even if that's yourself. And I'm not talking about talking to voices in your head. Talk to somebody else. If that's what you're experiencing, it's very okay and normal, and we can get some help, get some sleep, etc. But we need to encourage people to talk openly about what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and find somebody who is willing to either be a wall to let sounding board or someone that can serve back to you in a positive way. But we've got to process. Now, everybody processes differently. Some people journal. So talking to yourself through a journal could be one way. But we need to be more comfortable talking, not bottling things up. Because as we do, we shove things in, pressure builds, and explodes.
Have you seen Inside Out?
Yes. Yes. I haven't seen the new one, but I've seen the old one.
So you gotta, have you seen the new one? Inside Out 2? It's the movie.
It's a Disney movie about the different feelings in the head. Yes.
You've got
Don't
to go
do Disney movies.
Oh,
I have a 9 and 12-year-old. So we definitely watch these.
You have to go see Inside Out 2. Take your kids. They have a whole anxiety moment where they have like freak out, and
this podcast is not sponsored by Disney.
No, it's not. It's sponsored by nobody but Chord.
We would love to be sponsored.
No, absolutely. It was so good. It was so good. It really helps you kind of think about everything.
Yes, and we want to see it. My kids want to see it. The first one was good.
You're gonna love. If you liked one, you're gonna
great.
All right, this conversation.
I can't wait. What?
Elliot, it has been a pleasure.
Oh, he's cutting me off. He's so rude.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing all your successes in the future.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Thank you both for having me. I really appreciate it.
We'll see you guys next time. Well, that's a wrap on today's episode of Behind the Curtain, Nashville's movers, shakers,
and tastemakers.
We hope you've been inspired by the stories of passion, perseverance, and innovation right here in Nashville.
A big thank you to our guests for sharing their journeys, and to you, our listeners, for joining us. And of course, our gratitude to Chord Real Estate for making this conversation possible.
Don't forget to follow or subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
Thank us.
Yes, you did.
Oh, I guess I did. Well, thank us. Okay.
Like I was saying.
Oh, yeah.
Don't forget to follow or subscribe on your favorite platform to catch every episode, and hit that notification bell. We've got plenty more fascinating guests lined up, ready to share their insights and inspirations.
And we love hearing from you, so reach out to us with your thoughts, questions, or suggestions for who you'd like to hear from next.
Until next time, keep chasing your dreams and making your mark in Nashville.
Oh my goodness.
Remember,
am I talking to Casey
it's
Kasem?
The people behind the scenes that make the city shine.
I love it. Take care. See you behind the curtain.